Hey everyone. In this lecture, I want to talk about some of the key points in my book, The Digital Prism, Transparency and Managed Visibilities in a Datafied World, that was published in 2019 by Cambridge University Press. The book is an attempt to articulate how our present societies are marked by this obsession with digital technologies as a way to observe people and expose behavior and keep track of what citizens do. So walk around any big city in at least the Western world, and you will see lots and lots of surveillance cameras in the streets, in around properties, in people's houses, and so on. And this will only increase as more and more devices like smart doorbells and um, many applications like our TVs and so on will also have cameras that somehow are able to capture what people do when they come to visit you or watch TV and so on. So the book is an attempt to offer a sort of theoretical account and analytical account of these developments. So we don't just live in societies that are full of cameras. We also have, you know, a growing sort of focus on attempts to use digital technologies to capture what the crowds do, how people behave in the city, in the parks, in all parts of social life. So we have facial recognition as a growing sort of a technology that's growing in importance because it allows, for instance, big events like sports events and so on to be monitored real time, and you can check people at the entrance if they have a history of violence or criminal charges or anything like this. So not just at the level of sort of individual cameras, but also at a mass scale, we see a sort of obsession with ideas about doing surveillance and capturing what people do in the city or in our parks, in our streets, and so on. We also see this in workplaces where a lot of activities are tracked either through cameras or through trackers on employees or other ways of, as we've talked about, I think, movements in the floor and so on can be captured through sensors and all this kind of stuff. So I'm interested in what happens when our lives and our organizations and our societies increasingly rely on digital technologies for purposes of observation. And also increasingly with digital technologies, we get access to new parts of our bodies that were invisible to us in the past. So this is anything from fitness trackers that keep track of your sleep habits or your calorie intake or how many steps you make, to really sort of advanced genome mapping where we can start to open up the body and look inside our bodies for possible signals of disease or particular configurations of genes that point to possible diseases that we may get at some point or possible problems that we can detect early on. So my point is that the sort of focus on observation and capturing many parts of social life through digital technologies goes from anything, goes from surveillance cameras to facial recognition to different attempts at monitoring workplaces and into ways of looking into our bodies and understanding how it operates and so on. So the general point is that we now live at a moment in time where this focus on seeing things, observing things, disclosing things, doing surveillance and so on is all pervasive. So that's really the starting point for the book. This observation that we live at a moment in time when digital exposure seems to be the default, so to speak. It's the way much of social life has been turned into something that can be captured and stored and so on through digital technologies. So what I'm going to do in this lecture is to walk you through the sort of key points of the book, more or less in the order these points fall in the book itself. So this lecture will be a sort of a quick tour through the main points of the book as it unfolds. So the starting point for the book is to say that we need to articulate and theorize and explain or describe how our communication spaces look at the moment. So we can think of, looking back at the Enlightenment period and the printing press and so on. I think we could, in hindsight, we can see that particular kinds of technological transformations happened and didn't just, stay technological, but actually became very, very important for politics, for culture, for the workings of societies, possibilities for learning and getting new insights and so on. And in the same manner, I think we'll look back at our moment in time in maybe 30 or 50 years and realize that the communication spaces we live in have fairly sort of particular features and characteristics that may be difficult to theorize right now, but certainly will become more tangible and easy to identify later on. So this book is one more attempt, along with many other books, to start theorizing what these communication spaces look like. So one point in the book is that where in the past it may have made sense to think of digital technologies or the internet as some kind of cyberspace, some kind of place you could log on to and log off again, or some kind of a separate independent domain that was not really part of society. That story doesn't really make sense anymore, because in many, many ways, digital technologies have become these infrastructures. They've become sort of societal backbones for most of what we do as individuals and organizations and societies. So we can't really think of economic transactions without digital technologies. We can't think of politics without at least a dimension of social media and other types of digital technologies, and so on. The book is also an attempt to articulate the relationship and the difference, I think, between digitalization and datafication. So that a sort of shift from digital technologies as a way to distribute information and other kinds of objects into a moment where data becomes a kind of key resource and a driver for a lot of different phenomena and developments in organizational settings and beyond. The book also seeks to then capture where we stand at the moment in relation to conversations about digital transformations. So where a lot of early discussions about digital transformations were about innovation, connectivity, democracy, the sort of positive sides of digital transformations. We also have an increasingly strong focus, both in the sort of media, in among the public, and so on, that these digital transformations also pave the way for more problematic phenomena such as manipulation, surveillance, and new forms of injustice that cannot really be captured or didn't really come across in the sort of hype around Silicon Valley maybe 15 or 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. So we stand at a moment in time where we have to think in more sort of nuanced ways about digital technologies, not just as a positive force or a negative force, but really as a condition that we need to grapple with and understand and discuss. And this then, in this chapter, sort of leads to an attempt to describe the features of these new communication spaces that we live in. And obviously to articulate that these are not just technological transformations, they're actually transformations that cut to the core of what it means to be a human, what it means to be an organization, or how an organization operates. And it also, in many ways, is a way to understand the kind of societal transformations that we face at the moment. So this book, like many other books that sort of engage with questions about technology and societal transformations, doesn't really reserve the narrative to a story about technology, but to a much broader discussion of the kind of societal transformations that come with and also shape technological ones. So the key point of the book is that in these digital communication spaces, we can see everything and we can know everything. And when this is the sort of state of affairs, then something happens that we need to theorize and be able to identify. And this is what I term the management of visibilities. In many ways, the key message of the book is that in communication spaces where everything is exposed, people and organizations and societies will start to invest a lot of time and energy in managing their visibilities. And the central dynamic is what the book seeks to capture and illustrate and so on. So let's jump into the sort of the core argument when it comes to how we need to think about this relationship between digital transformations and the possibility to see everything, to have information about it, everything. So the book is an attempt to problematize and sort of highlight some of the problems with this established idea that digital technologies will give us more transparency. It will give us, ways of seeing things that were hidden in the past, and as Andy Greenberg calls it, we'll have machines that kill secrets. Another way to put it, or another sort of phrase that has been used to talk about these developments, is an old quote from an American judge called Louis Brandeis, and what he says is, sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants, electric light the most efficient policeman. So in many ways, this way of thinking about the relationship between technology and forces like sunlight and possibilities for sort of eradicating problems in society. That's the kind of recipe that this book seeks to problematize and offer a new reading of. So the way I put it in the book is to say, well, there seems to be a sort of underlying formula or recipe in our conversations about digital transformations and transparency, and it goes something like this. If we can simply get more information, disclose more information, then we can finally see things as they really are. It'll become difficult to hide and be corrupt and so on. And as a result of this, seeing what things really are, we will have more trust in society, we will have better ways of controlling bad behavior, and people and organizations will, it will lead to better conduct among people and organizations. So this formula that I've tried to capture in the second bullet point here is what I see to be sort of the core of the current infatuation or sort of excitement around this idea of transparency, and particularly digital transparency. So in these discussions about digital transformations and transparency, the focus is often on the quantity of information. So do we have enough information about this particular phenomenon? Do we know what this company is doing because it offers us a particular amount of information? And do we have the sort of right quality of information to assess what happens in this particular organization or in this particular setting? So in many ways, the focus is on not understanding really how things are, but mostly on sort of getting enough information and getting um, information of high quality. And the metaphor that I use to describe these types of approaches or understandings of transparency is that transparency projects are these kind of windows that are opened on reality. So the metaphor of a window, I think, sort of captures the way transparency is conceptualized in most mainstream accounts. That if we can open the window on what people think, or open the window of what organizations do behind the curtains and so on, then we can actually see what goes on. We can get a kind of direct access to reality. And this is the formula, or the sort of way of thinking that the book seeks to problematize. That we can't really equate more information with a better society. And if we don't accept this recipe or this formula, what then? How can we then think differently about the relationship between digital technologies and giving access to information, or exposing things? To do this, the book then offers the key concept that in many ways weaves through every single part of the book, and this is the concept of visibility management. So I think of this concept as a way to open up a more sort of critical way of thinking about the relationship between digital transformations and transparency, but also really a broader account of the relationship between technology and societal transformations. To develop this concept and sort of turn it into the main point of the book, I draw on different kinds of insights from sociology, from political science, from from existing work on transparency, but also on surveillance and opacity and secrecy and so on. But if I had to sort of highlight one idea that really led me on this path towards working with the concept of visibility management, it's the work of an Italian philosopher called Andrea Muti-Berigenti, and his work is really about sort of offering or establishing visibility as a key category for the social sciences, as he puts it. By this he means we have a lot of concepts in sociology or in social science more broadly that we rely on when we try to understand or describe how societies operate. So we may talk about structures, we may talk about class, or we may talk about other types of phenomena and use those to explain what happens in social settings. His point is maybe visibility should be part of that package, or maybe it should be one of the categories that we use to describe how societies operate. So I pick up on this idea and turn it into a concept and a kind of analytical vocabulary that allows me to capture the shape of these new sort of communication spaces that come out of digital transformations, a particular focus on information, and a particular sort of way of organizing or governing societies. And as you will see, if you read the book, these are also closely entangled with questions about power and control. So in many ways, the quote by Walters captures the sort of keywords of this investigation that underlies the book. The way I phrase what I'm interested in is really this relationship between seeing, knowing, and governing. So how is it that we sort of through digital technologies try and open up new ways of observing things, of producing knowledge about things, and steering things or controlling things in digital spaces. If you're familiar with the work of Michel Foucault, you will also recognize in many ways that this way of thinking about it, seeing, knowing, and governing, is in many ways sort of indebted to his work that also sought to capture how observation and making things visible and so on is an important way that you can control things or people and so on. So instead of this metaphor that I talked about on the previous slide, thinking about transparency as a kind of window opened on reality, the key concept or the key metaphor that I use in the book is to say maybe we should, think of the way digital technologies affect society and human behavior more as prisms. So a prism, as you will know, refracts light. So what enters into a prism comes out in a different shape. It's not like a window where you see things, or simple glass. Prisms refract things and create surprising kind of consequences. And it's not really that predictable what whatever enters the prism will look like when it leaves it and so on. So I use this metaphor of the prism, also in the title, the digital prism, to talk about these complications that come when digital technologies are used to understand society, to understand human behavior, and so on. And these then become questions about, as I said, refractions, complications of various sorts, information control, but also questions about power or social ordering. So in many ways, the book is a response to this question, I think. What happens when digital exposure is the default? When everything that we do and look for and our behavior and so on can be exposed and stored and kept and reused for various purposes. So then the book jumps into three different kinds of investigations. One is to look at what happens to humans. The second one is to look at what happens to organizations. And then finally to look at the kind of societies that come out of these developments. So if we start with the human, um, obviously we see lots of employees or public officials or people like policemen who increasingly are asked to wear body cams. The argument is obviously that if everything is recorded in these encounters between police officers and potential criminals, we can document what happens. We can, if something, if someone dies or something unexpected happens, we actually have the footage and we can go back and see who was, the victim and who was the attacker and so on. But the chapter in the book also seeks to capture the kind of complications that come with this idea that we can simply put up on cameras, turn our cameras on and then capture reality as it is. These complications are about, the kind of ways in which people start to act differently. So as a police officer, you may start to act differently if you know that everything is captured. Or if you're a doctor operating on someone, and you're on camera the whole time, you may start to take fewer chances and not perform operations in the way you would have done because you're scared that something may be captured on camera that could be used against you. Or think about kindergartens changing nappies of small children and so on. Those kinds of recordings could also be, could capture things that may look strange to people and may be used against someone. So I think the more we sort of go down the route of recording everything, the more people have to think about how they manage visibilities. If you jump to the picture on the bottom left, a key conversation in the chapter is also to talk about our digital doubles. This idea that everything we do in digital spaces creates these traces that are used to assess us in various ways. They sort of become proxies for us as humans. So in many ways and in many situations, we will be judged and evaluated and so on, not based on us as a person, as an individual, but on these digital traces. And this is why we talk about digital doubles as a kind of set of digital traces that you as an individual have to somehow take control of or responsibility over and curate in particular ways, because they can be used against you and you want them to look be close enough to the person you are or resemble the person you are well enough for those decisions about you to be fair and so on. So the point is, the more we start to make decisions based on digital traces, the more people have to engage in visibility management. Make sure that the traces they leave um, and the way they come across in social media, for instance, resembles the person they want to be or the kind of appearance they want to have. I think you're all aware of this if you're applying for a new job and you have a look at your Facebook account or your Instagram account, and it's full of pictures of you having drinks and looking kind of relaxed or out there or anything like this. So in that situation, you would probably go back and clean up your social media profiles to make sure that it gave the sort of appearance that you wanted to have for that particular job and so on. So, but it's a much more, I think, wide-ranging kind of phenomenon that we start to have to take responsibility over the digital traces we leave because they may be used against us. Then the chapter talks also about developments that have to do with capturing what people look like and how masses are captured on surveillance cameras and in different kinds of digital possibilities for exposure and so on. And then the chapter discusses some of the sort of reactions that tech companies have had to these developments, that people want to have a sense of control over the data and want to be able to decide who they share with and so on. So one of the discussions in the chapter is the emergence of these kind of dashboards at social media platforms like Facebook and so on, where you can decide who you want to share your posts with, and platforms like Snapchat are certainly sort of extreme versions of this, where you can decide how long you want a picture or a message to last and so on. So again, these are different ways of sort of capturing or illustrating in the book how visibility management becomes a key component of being an individual in our times. Then the chapter jumps to a conversation about how organizations that pick up on this ideal about transparency, how they start to operate in new ways and how it creates challenges for and these strange sort of complications in organizations when they go transparent, as I put it. So the book is actually the result of something called a Google Research Award that I received a number of years ago, and this was a fairly good sum of money from Google to do a research project on transparency. And this meant that I could spend time at the Google headquarters in Mountain View and do field work and interviews and observations and so on. And I think one of the sort of events that put me on track in terms of this book was that on the first day of this research project, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement at the Google headquarters saying that I would not share information about this. I would not disclose anything, not even the existence of this non-disclosure agreement with anyone outside Google. So obviously that is a strange clash between giving a professor the money to do a research project on transparency and then having him sign a non-disclosure agreement on the first day. We then worked this out, and the book is, it's out there, and I still haven't been sued by Google for any of this, but it certainly put me on this onto this idea that when organizations go transparent, they have to spend a lot of energy on articulating and sort of setting boundaries to information. So with these pictures on the slide, I try to capture some of the things I observed at particularly at Google, but also at Facebook in Mountain View. And the upper left picture is of one of the glass offices at Facebook. And when they showed me around Facebook, they were very sort of proud to say that everyone worked in an open space. There were no doors or no closed doors or no concealed or hidden activities going on in that company. So even, and this is where the picture is relevant, even when Mark Zuckerberg was having meetings with really important people, he would do it in a glass office that they called the aquarium. So the point was obviously that even really important meetings happen in glass offices where everyone can see what happens and so on. And this is obviously a much broader sort of issue, the sort of obsession with glass as a in sort of modern day architecture and the way it sort of gives this impression of openness and transparency and so on. There's also, there, as I observed and met with different people at Google, there was also a growing realization on my part that in many ways Google had taken on this ideal about transparency and translated it into many, many different things. So it's also a way to sort of build an organizational culture to say that we're a company where everything can be seen and shared, everything can be said, and the upper right hand image here is from a Google newsletter, internal Google newsletter about the kind of value of building a company around transparency and what they term voice. On the bottom right hand, there is a picture from one of these events at Google that they hold every Friday called Thank God It's Friday meetings, where all employees are invited to ask questions to Larry Page and Sergey Brin when they were still running the company. And obviously these are, also attempts to sort of translate an ideal about transparency into some ways of running an organization. So in various ways, this chapter sort of articulates what happens when organizations pick up on this ideal about transparency and translate it into a way of running their organizations. In the book, I also used the example of Buffer, a small social media company that in many ways took some of these ideas about transparency developed at Google and Facebook and took them, much further. So as you will have read in the book, there's this, for instance, this offer at Buffer that you can go on as much holiday as you want, as long as you share information about where you went and what you did and so on with the others. And what happened in this particular company was that employees would look at their bosses and see that they never took holiday and therefore not take up this very generous offer. There were also attempts to sort of get away from using email as a communication platform and have these open messaging fora where everything could be seen by everyone and so on. And the point in the chapter is that organizations in many ways break down if they go too much, if they become too transparent. People start to have physical meetings instead of using the company platform to discuss things, and they don't go on holiday because they realize that they can see that this is actually not the way things work in the company. So I'm interested in all these complications that arise from ideals about transparency. And as in the other chapters or throughout the book, the key point is that when organizations go transparent, employees and everyone have to engage in a lot of work that I term visibility management. So for instance, at Google, that doesn't have a central communication unit, the responsibility for handling information becomes a sort of individual or a team responsibility. And that obviously creates a huge need for people to be very good at navigating the sort of line between what can be shared and what cannot be shared. And there's a sort of individualization of responsibility for communication activities. And I noticed that a lot when I did my interviews, that some people at Google would be very open and tell me many things um, about their work and about the company and so on, because they were comfortable and knew how to navigate that boundary. They were good at visibility management. And other people would be very scared to talk to me and only say very sort of general things and not really feel comfortable because they hadn't figured out how to do visibility management in that particular context. The book then jumps to the level of society and talks about how this relationship between digital transformations and exposure shapes politics and the way we build our societies and so on. So one example is WikiLeaks, and the sort of the broader developments around leaking, where lots and lots of information spills into the public domain. And in many ways, we're sort of promised, to finally get insights into how something works and so on. But in practice, we have to do a lot of editing and sense making to figure out what is actually in those masses of information. I also talk about how, for instance, a company like Facebook has changed. This is the bottom left image, has changed from this simple platform set up to allow people or students to vote for the hotness of girls and so on, into a very ambitious platform, or actually a sort of a company that wants to understand how the world is changing. They want to connect everyone. They want to understand the world and build a new kind of economy. So the sort of transformations in ambitions when it comes to a company like Facebook speaks to this idea that if you own or have access to enough information, there is no limit to what you can actually change and control and engage in, and so on. The chapter also looks at some of the ways in which organizations and different companies, particularly tech companies, are using information in what is called transparency reports as a way to sort of position themselves and highlight some of the work they do, and do reporting in ways that don't really fit a kind of established way of reporting on your activities that other companies would follow. So we're fairly used to corporate CSR reports, corporate social responsibility and so on to take, or environmental reporting to take a very particular form, but that's shared across different companies and goes for a whole sector and so on. And tech companies have taken a very different approach and developed their own mechanisms for reporting on their work. And obviously, this kind of reporting is one way in which visibility management plays out. These companies are very strategic when it comes to what information they put in these reports, how that information positions the companies in particular ways, and really sort of navigate their role in the face of the public, in the face of regulatory bodies, and so on. And then finally, another example from this chapter is the example of the German Pirate Party that decided that this party wanted to go transparent. They wanted to live stream every single meeting. They wanted to share all sorts of information with everyone. So what happened in the case of the German Pirate Party was that it actually became impossible to engage in politics because no other parties wanted to collaborate with the Pirate Party, because negotiations and discussions in politics can't really happen in a public setting. There needs to be spaces and situations where negotiations can happen without anyone watching. So again, another example of how politics and more or less, societies broadly break down if we buy this recipe or this formula that more information will simply create um, more insight and better conduct. So let me wrap up. The book is as I've said, this attempt to capture what I think of as life in the digital prism. What does it mean for us as individuals, organizations, and societies to inhabit these digital communication spaces with the kind of characteristics that I've discussed? And I think the key point is that in these types of settings, visibility management becomes a key social phenomenon. And again, drawing on the work of Bridgenti that I mentioned in one of the first slides, I discuss how visibility management contains both dimensions, dimensions of recognition, but also dimensions of control. So it's through information that we become recognized as individuals or organizations and so on, but it's also through information that we, are controlled in particular ways, or that societies are governed or ordered in particular ways. So I think of visibility management as a sort of a theoretical lens or a theoretical approach that allows us to understand the kind of human and organizational and societal transformations that come with the digitalization and datafication. And this phenomenon or this situation then also raises a lot of different questions that we have to deal with. The book doesn't really offer responses to these questions or guidance on what to do, but it actually at least it offers some kind of discussions about what is it we need to take stock of or discuss as societies. So one issue is that increasingly many decisions will be made based on datafied predictions, and we need to sort of consider the limits of and the problems arising from this kind of approach. The problem is obviously that if we rely on digital traces as proxies, we may get results or conclusions that that we can't really guarantee the truth value of. So in many ways, we can get lulled into an idea that digital technologies simply open windows on reality and give us these types of insights. We also need to think about the kind of business that tech companies and digital social media companies and so on engage in. And here I use the term from Shoshana Zuboff's book on surveillance capitalism, where she talks about these companies being in the reality business. They're not just offering us access to information or relevant products and so on. They're actually shaping our realities and kind of creating needs for us and what she terms behavioral modification. So in many ways, these companies are meddling with the sort of core of what it means to be a human, and they have possibilities for shaping realities in ways that we have never seen before. And this obviously raises these questions about what kind of social order, what kind of societies are we building if we let this focus on hopes about digital transformations and more insight and transparency and so on guide us. So to wrap up, I think what the book leaves us with is this focus on how much time and how much energy and how many kind of resources we have to put in to this work of navigating, staying inside and out of sight, and managing our visibilities and making sure that our own attention is guided in the ways we want, but also that we guide other people's attention in the ways we want. So really, this focus on the management of visibilities as an essential dynamic at our moment in time and a sort of vocabulary for thinking about the digital communication spaces we live in. That's it.